Georgians are not filling those jobs. We're bringing in the talent, we're bringing in the people who are supporting those jobs and doing that work. So how can we be better preparing our workforce, not specifically just for the film industry, but for a number of creative industry jobs, which is growing. This is one of my favorite articles that I've come across in terms of why STEAM. It talks about, so it says the only way to beat the robots is to back arts education in schools. And you would think that it goes on to talk about creativity, right? That's the argument we hear all the time about the arts. We got to make students more creative. But I don't think you can really say that engineers and scientists, that all these other professions and ways of thinking are not creative. Would you guys agree? But the article goes on to talk about empathy being at the core of why we need the arts in schools, and that ability to see things from someone else's perspective being at the core of why we should be thinking about music, why we should be thinking about visual arts. And I'll add as well, when we're talking about STEAM and bringing in the arts, it's not just visual arts. It could be music, dance, theater. We have standards for media arts, and music. So those are 5 different areas that you can choose from, and there's a lot of flexibility of how you bring the arts into your classroom. But also, how do we prepare students for all jobs? I don't know about you guys, I feel like I'm constantly having to make things for my job, whether it's flyers or presentations. Now people are talking about podcasts at the DOE. That was a new thing I heard in a meeting yesterday. We're also start making podcasts. It's not my skill set, but it was. These ways of communicating that the arts can provide those skills for is going to be a part of every profession. We're so interconnected. Students are going to need those skills that they
20, 30, 40 frames a second. And the camera's just not able to capture that.
Has anyone heard of this guy, John Maeda?
As always when you're recording TV.
I definitely encourage looking him up. He has made himself the self-proclaimed founder of STEAM. So he spent his career back and forth between the Rhode Island School of Design and MIT, and is a huge advocate for having seen the MIT side and the Rhode Island School of Design side that the arts need to be a part of the equation. And I like this quote of his. He says, "We seem to forget that innovation doesn't just come from equations or a new kind of chemicals. It comes from making them place. Innovation in the sciences is always linked in some way, either directly or indirectly to experience." So there's a lot of great resources. He has a website called STEM to STEAM that has good resources on it as well. Also, if you ever just need good STEAM quotes, just a few ones. I'm going to skip some of this, but this slide shows a couple of examples from business and industry in terms of ways that they're bringing in the arts. This top picture on the left is actually a group of police officers, and they are in an art museum looking at a work of art and talking about a work of art. Why do you guys think they might be doing that? Police officers in an art museum. What skills?
Critical thinking.
Yeah, go ahead.
I watch Blacklist, they're profiling it.
Yeah, like profiling, trying to
You
figure out
gotta
what's
use
happening.
critical thinking in order to.
What else?
You've gotta use critical thinking in order to actually delve into a piece of artwork because the detail is completely and utterly, not only the way that it was painted or drawn or whatnot, but it's also the ideas behind it, and you've got to figure out and delve into each section of the artwork in order to figure out what, the artist was trying to portray or where it was or why it was painted.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. The critical thinking, what's happening in this image, all the different details that could be a part of it. Anyone else? Yeah, that's exactly what they were doing here. They were trying to train police officers in this specific area, and it's actually something that's happening all around the country, to really notice those details. When you walk up to a crime scene, how do you set aside your biases to make sure you're noticing everything? And also then understanding that you and I might look at a painting together and I think one thing's going on and you think something else is going on, but you're the art historian and we're both wrong, right? So how do you really just focus on, here's the details, here's what I see. Same thing here, this is on the bottom, a group of medical students. When you walk up to a patient, how do you notice all the details without jumping to conclusions? I think that's something we would all like our doctors to have at school. I don't know about you guys. And then this one on the right is a group of students in different science majors at Johns Hopkins. And what the professors were finding was bright, had great ideas, but they couldn't communicate them. They didn't have the public speaking skills, they couldn't get in front of a group. But also, and I'm sure you guys see this with your gifted students, what happens when something goes wrong? Shut down. Tears, I don't know what to do. And I don't know that the college students were crying, but they were finding that same reaction. Well, I'm so used to getting it right. So they've actually had them start to do improv. Because improv's all about, we're gonna throw something at you that you might not know what's coming, and you have to work with it, you have to go with it. And also having those public speaking skills, that comfort getting in front of people. So these are just some examples of where business and industry are seeing skills that are lacking in the workforce. You always hear about the soft skills, employability skills, and really the arts are a foundational way to teach that. So some of the reasons, and I'm speaking to the choir, you guys are already on board for STEAM, but some of the reasons why it connects to students' culture, their experiences, and interests. As you're thinking about STEAM units, have those conversations. What are the kids interested in? I have no idea. Is it comic books? What type of music? We have schools that will have their students write raps about the water cycle. So it's a great opportunity for you to really tap into what they're interested in. It's hands-on, it's experiential. They're gonna need it for future careers. It's really about equity as well. There's some really interesting research out right now about STEAM in particular and how it's bringing more girls into STEM. If you all, I'm sure, already know, our STEM fields are wildly underrepresented with women. It's very skewed to the side of having men in those professions, but by having the arts involved, they're finding that more girls are finding that entry point and saying, okay, wait, I could see a place for me in STEM and STEAM. Teaches empathy and it helps students be more motivated. We keep getting feedback from our schools that are doing STEM and STEAM, and they say, our kids want to go to school. Attendance rates have gone up. There was an administrator who told us last week that they had a kid who was out sick, and he was really upset, and they thought it was because if he missed school, he would have to miss baseball practice as well. But he said, no, I'm so upset because I don't want to miss STEAM. So it's making school exciting, and how do you get kids to be excited about going to school? I'm gonna skip some of this. There's so many reasons why the arts should be a part of the equation, and it's out there, it's all over, there's lots of research happening about it. Here are some of those examples. Okay, so how do we do this? I know I saw that you guys have started your work and you have your gardens going. How is that? Is that a grade level project or school-wide? What have you guys decided in terms of that?
School-wide, each grade level has their own point of it.
Okay, perfect. So each grade level has their own focus, and that's your school-wide project. So that's a huge piece of it, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So getting started, these are some terms. Have you guys seen these terms before? Some of them. So these are different terms that get thrown around when you're thinking about bringing the arts into the classroom. So when we talk about STEAM certification, it's really bringing those art standards to life in every classroom. It doesn't mean we have a STEM program going and we also have an arts classroom or we have a music classroom. Though many schools do think that, you'd be surprised. So arts enhancement is what you would describe as you're bringing in the arts, but it's really trying to enhance another subject area. There's a time and a place for that, and that would be like your Schoolhouse Rock. We are learning about conjunctions, but we're using music as an avenue to do it. You're not necessarily learning about music as well. It's not on the same playing field. This is often where all of the art on the wall looks the same. You might be learning something, but you're not really diving into that piece where the students have the originality. They're getting to create something of their own. It's making to create something specific. Arts integration is going to be, you're putting the arts on the same playing field as another subject. You're going to have a standard for the arts that you're teaching as well as a standard for the other subject area. It's typically going to be one-to-one. And then with STEAM, what we're typically looking for is what we refer to as the triangle. That at the minimum, you have a science, arts, and mathematics concept that you're teaching. How do you get all three of those in there? And then it also has all the pieces of STEM with the inquiry, application, you will find that when we come in, we're really going to talk to your students. We want to see that your students understand what's going on. They understand the connections that are being made. We could say things are happening all day long, but do your students really understand the interdisciplinary piece? Can they explain, this is the arts concept that I'm learning? What we see a lot is we'll go in for a STEAM evaluation and we'll ask the students, well, what are you guys doing? I don't know, we're painting. You guys do this a lot? No, we don't ever do this. I don't know. I think these are the art teacher's paints that we're borrowing. Oh, well, what are you learning about? I don't know, we're just decorating. So they will tell everything. They will tell all your secrets. And that was this situation in this particular instance where STEAM isn't putting paint on the STEM bridge, right? It's not doing something arts and crafts, bringing out the popsicle sticks. It's thinking about, well, why do we want to teach this arts concept? Why do students need to understand whatever the arts concept is? So, for example, tracking back when I talked about students maybe making a rap about the water cycle. Well, that's great, but are they learning about rhythm or learning something? Just even if it's one thing, some sort of arts concept or vocabulary to put them on the same playing field. There was certainly a lot of room or opportunity. I would have been happy if the kid told me I had to pick my own color scheme, right? But what is that one thing where it's bringing those arts up to that same playing field? Or we compared bridges in different communities, or we looked at bridges in our own community and looked at the design of them. So it's very open-ended what it could be, but you want to make sure it's not just we're pulling out glitter, which I don't recommend ever. We're pulling out glitter to make it steam. Anyone else hate glitter? Probably that teacher. These are some things to think about when you're designing STEAM lessons in terms of the arts, and I'll go into kind of some more general pieces of certification in a minute. But are one or more of the 21st century thinking skills evident? So are the students working in groups? If not, how are they communicating their ideas? Great opportunity to write artist statements or reflections. Are they collaborating? Are they doing critical thinking? Are they being creative? Are they engaged in constructing or demonstrating understanding opposed to memorizing and reciting? That kind of ties to this next one. Are they making something original instead of just copying or parroting? Do students revise their products? Does the lesson connect to math and science curriculum and or real world concern? Any questions so far? Okay, we're gonna do a quick activity to get you guys chatting because we still have about 40 minutes. So this is a quick activity we'll do. So this actually happened. This is in Atlanta. It was around this time last year. So this giant circle that you see actually fell off this mural in the middle of a storm. It came down, almost tragically impaled the Starbucks, which would be a disaster. But it actually did take out several power lines. The power was out in that area for most of the next day, which actually is a disaster in Atlanta. The traffic is already horrendous. Can't wait for it's night. So we're gonna do just this short activity, and you don't have to actually make anything right now. But at your tables, here's your challenge, your design challenge. So your group has been commissioned to design a new mural for the Icon Midtown building in Atlanta, Georgia. The design must have some three-dimensional elements, but must be able to withstand heavy winds that may occur during storms. Okay. So that's all the information I'm going to give you. And we'll take about 7 minutes to discuss your ideas. You can jot things down if you want, but be prepared to share some of your ideas. You guys can start.
Yeah. We have to create, it has to be green. Better blue.
Are you video?
Yeah.
Oh.
Is there some kind of wall? Yes, three-dimensional, has to withstand.
And we need to research the,
I don't know. Does that be? It says green.
are you, this has
Yeah.
been three-dimensional. Well, then, I don't care.
The design must be some three-dimensional elements, but must be able to withstand stronger winds. So if it was a sphere, does it have to be on that building?
Yeah.
has to replace
A
that.
new mural for the, okay.
So I think the brown ones would help with the storm winds.
Maybe because it was around it.
Maybe if it was metal.
Or like if it's hinged or if it's welded. It does look kind of like
Yes, exactly. How is it?
you can make it do it. So, but I need those questions answered before I can.
Does she want like a script to it too?
Because if I draw a picture, like a diagram,
So that didn't need to be like a pyramid, so it doesn't matter which
Like
way
I was
it goes,
thinking,
it's
I mean,
really-
it's not yeah, Matthew stays before. But it has to, wait a minute. You're undoing the circles. I'm telling you, I'm the circles. You're talking about it, Haley. I'm just telling you. Okay, Dracula. My husband black hair. Oh, you don't touch on me. That was the design. She said to new design. Yeah. You said a new mural. It says new mural.
Garbage and arugula and something else in the, earlier, like in the winter, that there was a 2-week period that it kept raining, so we missed our window, so we had to just postpone that, and so we're gonna just do the, for the spring, in the next. One thing that they have done, they sent in the cabbage plants, each student got a cabbage plant to take home to do for that's something, like each grade level has something different that we're planting. So you can kind of see the variation between grade levels. Part of the state. On the side of the road, play songs. So you roll down your window. You play songs. So my thought was, well, we both can do that. Why don't we just do sharing? Because that I don't want to, there was a thing on some special that talked about that road, and they designed it to, and it played a tune. What's that song with the road? On the road? I need you to sing that with me. It's not, I think 61.
Well, when they were hatching, they were inside the computer. And she just put her phone on it, so it was live hand.
It's not.
But it is, it's coming between and where we had the match, like you were talking about, it passed through.
It's not,
Aerodynamically
there you
designed.
go.
That's the word I was.
There you go.
Trying to enunciate. It is not, it didn't happen. It didn't happen. It didn't happen.
We got there. We got there.
Yeah, and we agree on material, and it still needs to be passed out. It just has instead of
That's what I was thinking. You know, like big, powerful, and then to like Cartersville.
Yes.
Like that's the type of material we're talking about as far as like they could use to protrude out the building for the design, and they could use the mesh for the other end.
We're talking about like, you know, when you do it and do it like a wire.
We need that in that area.
You know what I'm talking about, when you have it.
Yeah, that's how we're gonna make the semi-sphere work for us. So we're doing the semi-sphere. Well, it did talk about a mural though. So like they could mix colors.
Who wants to share just some of the things you guys discussed, some of the ideas that you came up with? What are some of the ideas you had?
We want to reflect on the '96 Olympics, and we're going to do a torch that's made from harp strings, so that as the wind blows, it plays a tune.
Oh my
Oh,
goodness.
And then
my.
you pull in some elements from really tech engineers and historic architect to design it, and then you throw in some gauntlets of wind, fabric.
I love that. So thinking of some things that are specific to the Atlanta community. You talked about the Olympics. You talked about Georgia Tech, with the wind. So bringing in some things, but then also I love the idea of how do you use the wind instead of having it go against you and tear things down, so using the wind to have a musical element.
And if it falls down, it's not gonna hurt that much.
That's
A
true.
string or two broken,
It'll hurt a lot.
Starbucks is safe, so you win.
Thank goodness.
So one of the big wires come down this side.
Yeah, we totally.
We use the
Imagine
infrastructure beams to come out and secure our windmill,
But it's gonna be in the shape of a power symbol.
and it's going to spin and power the building, and it's going to be done in rainbow because it's.
Because it's Midtown and we do Pride.
That's
So,
There we go.
all right, we're gonna-
Wonderful. All right, so we are harnessing the power of the wind. We got the rainbow going in Midtown.
No, we can play music as the windmill goes round.
And it's gonna be the shape of the power, so you're gonna have some wind energy component to it. All right, very good. All right, what else?
We're not trying to say, we're doing leaning.
Okay.
We said that we would maybe kind of go with the circle theme, but maybe make them like semi-spheres, because we're doing geometry right now, so that the wind would go around it instead of.
Love that, connecting to your standards, excellent. So bringing in, some different shapes and how wind would move through it without ripping it down. And it was actually, so you can kind of see it up here, it's like a half circle came off of it. And it was still that big. But any other ideas? Do one more group.
Come on, guys, share.
We kinda went with what they were saying, but I'm redneck, so I went to the race on Sunday, so we were talking about like the aerodynamics of like the race cars. 'Cause that's all they talked about.
All
So
right.
we kinda went with the prism type thing, because it doesn't matter which way the wind blows, it's gonna
Okay.
go over the same way.
All right, so you're applying some prior knowledge from what you know about race cars and bringing that into your theme here. Very good. All right, all great ideas. Very good. I'm impressed. You guys have a lot of really creative ideas and did a great job of thinking about the space and where it might be and how that affects the design. So here's my question to you. Was this STEAM? Was this STEAM?
It talks about mural, so, I mean, that's part of art.
Okay, so that was good. We had, we talked about a mural. What else? We'll do this. What was good about it? We talked about a mural. What else?
Critical thinking. was
Critical
being
thinking.
done, Collaboration was being done.
And you had to work together. What else? Creativity, and you also brought in the music. You had to be creative. Someone brought in music. All right, what was bad about this lesson? You're not gonna hurt my feelings by design. All right, we didn't do anything hands-on. That was kind of based on time. I've had groups do this, like kind of build it out before, but yeah, we didn't do anything hands-on. You just discussed it. What else?
We didn't specifically talk about the science and math of it.
Yeah, you didn't talk about the science and math. So I asked you to, let's see what I say, withstand heavy winds that may occur during storms. We didn't really talk about the science and mathematics you would need. I didn't give you any dimensions.
Yeah, I would have liked a little bit more detail, location, details, a little bit around. I had to look up what icon it is down.
Right, I didn't tell you anything about Icon Midtown.
I wanted to know if we were gonna test it with a hair dryer.
Oh, yeah.
That was my number one.
Yeah, how are you gonna test it out? I didn't tell you anything about this community, and it's not your community. I took this and I found it on the internet and I did it, but it's not really necessarily relevant to you guys. And I don't know anything about the Midtown Icon building, so I'm sure you guys don't either, right? What else? What was frustrating about it?
Well, it says three-dimensional elements. I mean, does that mean that something has to be sticking out, or does it have to give an illusion of it being 3D? I mean,
Sure, so didn't really go into what that meant in terms of the
the
parameters.
expectations were.
What about me as the facilitator? What did I not do?
You didn't provide any thought-provoking questioning to the groups as they were going around.
Exactly. I didn't provide any thought-provoking questioning. I really didn't provide any. I actually asked a group about the garden for most of it, so that was not helpful. I didn't come around. I wasn't asking for clarifying questions. I wasn't trying to make sure that there was understanding of the project, and checking to make sure that, you know, you guys weren't arguing and fighting over supplies. I didn't give you any supplies. But I wasn't a facilitator. The biggest issue with this project is that it's not standards-based. It's a fun design challenge and maybe an activity, but there's no standards. Not even really for the arts included in this. So if I had really done this, this is what I would have done. This is how I would have started. I would have started with my standards. So yes, maybe I saw that activity or I saw that instance happen and I wanted to make a STEAM lesson out of it, but I would have needed to start with my standards. And then from there, identifying learning targets. So when we talk about standards and our Georgia Standards of Excellence, that's teacher language. That's for you. That's not for your students. We never want to see your students writing out the direct language from the standards. So how do you really break it down and figure out what should my students be able to articulate by the end of this? What should my students understand? What does this standard really mean? What do they need to know? And then you want to figure out structuring your design thinking, or do you guys have a process that you use here, engineering design? Yes, okay. So figuring out what is the process you're going to use and what's going to happen in each step of that process. And then from there, you're going to build your lesson, the activities that go within it, the vocabulary. So maybe I would have done this. So this is the 6th grade version. Maybe I would have had the students, I would have identified the different standards based on, and I've done this for 4th grade as well, for this specific lesson. So looking at the climate and the weather, looking at ratio relationships, visualizing and generating ideas for creating works of art. In middle school, they keep journals for the arts and reflecting on the context. And then from there, I could have broken it down to learning targets. So students will be able to articulate how air pressure and weather fronts are related to these events such as tornadoes and thunderstorms. Students will be able to identify indicators to predict a tornado or thunderstorm, how you're connecting it to your grade level standards, and so on. For the arts, I would have talked maybe about, well, what is public art? Why do we have public art? Is there public art in your community? What does that look like? And then the STEAM journal. Do you guys have STEAM journals?
I have journals in the STEM lab.
In the STEM lab,
And
okay.
they have journals that they're using.
Art has journals.
And art has journals, okay.
But we don't have one that travels from each room.
Okay, so I'll talk about that I'll pull up another PowerPoint in a minute to show you guys some examples of that, because that is a new requirement for certification, is the STEAM journal. So I'll talk to you guys a little bit about that. And then what I would have done from there is really blocked it out. So you guys can probably think of ways that this could have connected to elementary school. The dimensions, and maybe the students had to make an area model, right? How, looking at the standards that you have for specifically maybe 4th grade science. So how do you make it connect to your standards? And then would have walked them through. So for example, if I was using this process, and what I like about this one is that it puts empathy at the front. And that's a really easy trick if you're trying to figure out a way to bring in the arts. I think I'm seeing, is the first step of your process ask? You might have a question under there where the students have to ask, who is the user? Who's going to see this? That's where you can really start to bring in those design components that would go in the arts. And define, this might be a 2-week project, and define, we might have some videos and we're talking about the weather. We're gonna introduce some of the concepts for the area model, and we're gonna build from there. Maybe they would have to brainstorm, come up with their ideas, show me their understanding of the math standards, of the art standards, build a prototype. Maybe that's where we pull out a big box fan or hair dryer, try and figure out, okay, are things gonna fall off? Giving them an opportunity to revise and see what goes wrong. And of course, testing it out. Of course, you would adapt this to fit whatever process your school uses. But you wanna make sure it's purposeful. This is the biggest challenge that we see our schools have, working with STEM and STEAM certification. If you have Pinterest and teachers pay teacher lessons, they sometimes can be a good place to start, but always kind of tearing them apart, because none of those are written for Georgia Standards of Excellence. None of them are written for our state. So how do you take those and pull them back and make sure you're getting as much out of them as possible before you have your students spend several hours making a mural, pulling out all the supplies and doing a big project? You want to make sure it's purposeful and you're going to get as much learning out of it as you can. Okay, so I'm going to pull up, switch gears a little bit. Okay, so when we're talking about STEM and STEAM certification, these are kind of the big components. You have your project-based learning, and that would be your garden. So your overarching grade level school-wide focus, where students are solving a real world problem. And it sounds like you guys are already doing a really great job. You have community partners who are involved with this. That's great. Then the other piece that tends to be a little bit more difficult is your day-to-day interdisciplinary instruction. So do you guys have a district-wide pacing guide that you use? Okay. So is it 9 weeks or?
Well, the whole year is mapped out.
Right.
For every subject anyway.
Okay. So what you would be doing, and I don't know how flexible yours is in your district, but it would be looking at, okay, let's say it's a 1 month chunk. What are all the different standards that you're gonna have to hit in math and science, and where can you find places where you can connect them? A lot of times what our schools will do to really think about this, they'll map out, okay, here's all the science standards for this frame, and I have to stay in these based on my district for these 9 weeks or these 6 weeks, whatever it is, it's different everywhere. I'm gonna figure out where these connect. And the great thing about the arts is that there's no pacing guide, and you really get to choose what you wanna bring in, but also having that familiarity with your grade level art standards. Has anyone here had the chance to look over their art standards for your grade level? A couple people. The art teacher, that's good. So that's definitely a good place to start. When I first started in this role, my background's in visual arts education. I can't read music, I know nothing about music, I have no rhythm. So one of the first things I did was just looked at the Georgia Standards of Excellence for all of the arts subject areas. And I think by doing that, it made me feel a lot more confident. Maybe I don't have rhythm, but I know what it is. I don't know a lot about theater, but I could teach theater etiquette in my class. And so I encourage you to look at them because I think you'll find some places where it's not that scary to start with. So definitely do that. Always driven by grade level standards of excellence. That is the biggest thing that we look for with STEM and STEAM certification. What are the standards that are being taught? Do the students understand it, and is it coming out through this project? And looking for especially that science and math connection, as well as the arts coming in. Learning targets are identified. It's documented in a STEM or STEAM journal. So this is a journal that every student has where they would be putting anything that's interdisciplinary. It doesn't mean that your math practice problems go in here. It doesn't mean that your science notes go in here. It would be when you're having those moments where the students are applying it. Typically your big PBL, so if they're measuring plants in the garden, or they're taking notes when a community partner comes in about the garden, or about the chicken coops. That's where that would go in those journals.
Is it okay if the journals are like in Google Classroom? Can they be digital journals?
So in elementary, we haven't seen it be successful for digital journals. I'm not gonna say no. What we have found is that our schools have struggled with the digital. The students are having trouble finding where the things are, especially K2. Where things are saved, opposed to having that really strong reflection, documentation, I'm writing down what I'm doing, but it also becomes a record of everything they've done in STEM and STEAM. One of the big issues that I've seen with STEAM is that it's really fun. So the students might remember making the mural and pulling out the box fan, but it's harder to remember I was learning about area models. But by having that documentation where they're going through step by step in the journals, okay, in the ask phase, I took these notes and these were the things I was learning about. In the define stage, we watched that video about tornadoes and I took these notes and here's how I'm gonna apply it. So it's all about the application of the interdisciplinary for the journals. Students document data collection, so a lot of that is gonna be in your garden. And students are using the school program identified thinking process. You guys already have your process. Something to consider as you roll out journals. A lot of schools will put them in the front page of their journals, and that might already be the case in the journals they have in the different classrooms. But it becomes a part of, this is what we do, this is our culture, this is how we solve problems at our school. We're using it all the time. We're gonna use it when we're writing, we're gonna revise, we're gonna use it when we get in a fight on the playground. How could we have handled the situation better? So it just becomes a part of your school culture. A number of our schools have figured out some questions underneath each of them to try to give a streamlined process. for what do you mean in each of these steps of your process. So really diving into that if that's something you guys haven't already done. Well, what do you mean as a school by ask? What do you mean as a school by improve? What are some things that would drive that? And then as you're planning these STEAM lessons, you'd be figuring out, well, what additional questions would go under each of those categories as the students are going through it. You know, a lot of time we'll see where there's a design challenge at the end of the teaching. It almost becomes the dessert at the end. You want it to be the application from the beginning. A kid's gonna be a lot more excited to learn about an area model if they know they can apply it to this project that they're doing. So introducing it early and building it out opposed to it being, we did all these things and now we're doing this from the project at the end. I'm gonna skip this because you guys already have your PBL. These are just some other examples. Some of our schools, there's a school in Blue Ridge that has an apple orchard that they've partnered with. This is a middle school with a field studies lab where they take it out and they do some research on wetlands. A lot of schools will do erosion if you have an area where your playground or basketball courts or whatever you have at your school has erosion. That's a problem that our schools often solve. Sustainable agriculture is big. Film, this is something that one of our schools has started doing in Savannah. Do you guys have a green screen here? It's really easy. This looks really fancy. You could actually just put up the green butcher paper and it would work. I bought a $8 green screen on Amazon Prime, and that works just as well. So you don't have to have fancy lights or anything. You just have, and there's lots of free apps to do it. So thinking about the media arts and how you can bring that in. So they have their students make a lot of PSAs or different presentations using green screen technology, and they love it. Okay, so day-to-day interdisciplinary, this would be where you're thinking about how your standards align. So this is a school where they were designing their garden beds and had to bring in their mathematics and looking at fractions. This one up here on the top left is a project that a first grade did with a community partner. So a local theater had a production of rainbow fish. So the students built this rainbow fish and had to bring in some of their math standards and had to decide what materials they wanted to use. I think a lot of it is actually recycled CDs that they use to make the scales in different parts, at least on the tail. That looks like tissue paper. And it then went on display at the theater, and it actually now lives at the Columbus State Department of Education. This one here is a good example. This was a 5th grade project where the students had to design a food truck. So they had to think about design and think about the arts component, marketing, but then in terms of their science, they had to have a recipe that was either physical or chemical change. They had to do all of their decimal work for it, so they then had to actually build out the recipes, and they had to go on Amazon Fresh and figure out exactly how much they would need of every ingredient, and did all of their mathematics and decimals. And then later on in the year, when they got to their coordinate planes unit, they revisited it and had to figure out what the layout inside the food truck would be. So a lot of different ways they pulled in the standards throughout one year. This was a project down here. This is at a STEAM certified school that's in Harris County. This was a project, 3rd grade, where they were bringing social studies standards, so looking at the New American Indian standards, science standards, looking at pigments in terms of their rocks and mineral standards. So how were paints created before you could go out and buy them? So that's what they were looking at there. And then they were also doing perimeter. So with their designs of their projects, the students had to measure and figure out what the perimeter was. So it doesn't always have to be something so big, just thinking of how can it be applied. That's cool. This would be an example of arts integration. So this was a project where they were looking at force and motion, and also the artist Jackson Pollock, checking my time here. So you can see where they had to go through and document. And this school uses a template where they identify what the standards are, the learning target, and then they make sure every standard shows up in the student rubric. Okay. So typically the journals are just composition books. That's what we see most often. They're usually really disgusting by the end of the year, like kind of sticky because they're so well loved. They're going out to the garden all the time. The students wind up loving these so much. When we go in schools, they pull us over, oh, I want to show you my journal. I want to show you this thing I did. This project back in the fall was so fun. I loved it so much. I want to tell you about it. here's what I learned. So in this example, it's very student driven. So at the top in the ask section, it says, what is the most complicated artistic way we can lessen the carbon footprint? I hope that's not a teacher-generated question. It doesn't sound like one to me. But you want the students to be reframing, well, what is it that I'm trying to do? In the imagine stage, you see that they're coming up with these ideas, figuring out what their plan's gonna be. I would like to see more notes here or documentation that shows how they're applying the standards or the different concepts that they've learned about. This was an example of a group that was doing a ramp project, and you will find that we often will not walk up to your group in your class that has the most beautiful creation. We'll walk up to the one where like the duct tape's falling off the side and there's a whole mess and there's scraps everywhere and they don't know where the ruler is. But that was this group. But when I walked up to him, the student opened the journal and was able to talk me through every single thing he'd been doing. He could tell me about, you know, well, at first we tried to make it really tall, but then we realized that that wasn't gonna work, and they have their measurements there. This is 14 centimeters. Well, there was too much pipe cleaner, and then this didn't work, it was too thin. And the students have that documentation to show, this is the process I've been going through and the discoveries that I've been making, and here's how I can show that I've been doing that. Where's kindergarten? Kindergarten? So journals look a little different in kindergarten. They probably can't write out the whole process. They might still be learning how to spell their name, right? So typically kindergarten's gonna look pretty different. That's gonna be, we're learning those foundations. We're learning how to make a plan. So here they had built day and night dioramas and they drew a plan, and then on the next page it was as simple as we counted how many circles we used in our design, how many triangles we used, and did some tally marks. So they're learning those foundations that are gonna build up to the other grade levels as they get deeper into your design process. This was a kindergarten project as well. The school collected plastic bottles to build a greenhouse, and you can see where they drew out, and each student had to come up with their plan. Each student has that in their journals. Each student has that documentation. But he could tell me all about how they had to do the adding and subtracting stuff and had to figure out how many more bottles they needed, and could show me, you know, where they had done their tally marks to figure out, and how they figured out more bottles were needed if it was the smaller bottle versus a big bottle. So it becomes that student's way to show their understanding. This is an example where they were documenting, they were looking, this is a school in North Georgia, they were looking at bird seed and which one's most popular in the area. But what I like about this is each student has the documentation. They were measuring how much was gone from a bird feeder regularly, but each student writes it down and each student does the measurements, and that's really important. It's not just on a board and we come up and I'm gonna measure the kale growth and everybody writes it down. Every student has that opportunity to have that hands-on experience with it. It's another example, same thing with a tower garden. Making connections clear is really important. We don't care if you have charts like this, where you are being super clear with the students. So this is an example. This is Henderson Mill, which is in DeKalb County. They're STEAM certified. And they make it really clear. Here's the science we're doing. We're looking at erosion. The technology is you're gonna have to come up with design using this specific program. The arts is we're gonna look at the artist Andy Goldsworthy and how he created things using sticks and rocks and how you might apply some of that design. And it's very clear, and that helps the students have that reference. Okay, yeah, we're doing this really cool project. We're gonna slow down erosion on the nature trail, but here's all the things that I'm learning to apply to that. This is from that project that I showed you where it was the 3rd grade project where they had to figure out the perimeter. They had to be really clear. Here's exactly what I want to see in your journal. This was during their plan stage. They had to draw a model, measure to the nearest inch, record those. This is called the perimeter. It's making those connections very clear. Okay, any questions so far? About the journals, PBL, day-to-day? What questions do you guys have? What stresses you out most about this, or what are you most excited about?
When you have the parameters of a what do we call it, the scope and sequence, what do you call it, where it's.
The pacing.
Thank you, that's what we call it here. When you have the parameters of that for each subject area, I think when I think about this, not feeling as though we have the freedom to say, okay, well, here's a science topic, and this would really connect well with this skill in math, but this is in the first 9 weeks, and that's in the fourth 9 weeks. And like, when you have limitations like that, where there are certain pacing things with certain assessments, provided, how do you break through that? How do you connect when they may not connect naturally?
Right. Are you guys a Eureka Math District?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And they have common assessments after every
Right.
unit, so it's not like the teacher has the freedom to say, oh, this will go really well with, perimeter, but that's
Right.
gonna be tested next night, so I've gotta come back to what, and I see what she's saying, because I run into that a lot too.
Yeah.
I have a little more freedom to grab some standards out, but.
Right, exactly. And that's a challenge that a lot of our schools face, specifically Eureka Math is everywhere in the state. And Lucy Calkins. Those are the two that I see everywhere. And it doesn't add an additional challenge of, you do have to do these things, and it is scripted. You do have to do specific things. So a lot of what this is gonna be is figuring out, yes, we're still gonna do our Eureka Math, but how can we find ways for them to apply it? Typically, it's gonna follow your math timeline, and if there's any flexibility for your science, making that work. If there's not, finding where those connections are. A lot of times, our schools that are on really regimented, scripted, you have to do this day, that innovation, that STEAM might come a little bit later. It might be, we're gonna revisit this math standard that was from 2 months ago, but there's just this really great opportunity. And that's okay too, because your students are still gonna be tested on that. They still are expected to know that by the end of the school year in the grade levels where they're not tested. So that's okay too if you do have to kind of pull things or review when you're designing these projects. But that is a challenge, absolutely. It makes it a little bit more difficult for your district, but it can be done, and we've seen many schools do it successfully. What else?
How many of the challenges or the big problems do you expect to see?
So in terms of the big project,
Yes, I mean, the schools are they doing them once a 9 weeks? Are they per subject, or are they typically doing them once a month, or every week, or?
are you referring to like the garden or the day-to-day?
The more day-to-day?
So it's gonna be up to you. You might have a big kind of day-to-day type of project like the food truck example. That probably took them at least a month, right? They were hitting a lot of different standards and building their decimal standard understanding while they went through it. And that's okay, but you might have one that only takes 2 days. What we don't wanna see is we're just doing STEM activities when we can fit them in. It's really a change in how. How are you approaching your standards? How are you teaching your standards and giving that application to your students? It's very flexible. We typically see at the minimum, it's happening once a month. But having that evidence that these are the activities my students have done where they've been able to apply their understanding. In terms of the PBL, I would say focus on your garden and don't add anything else while you guys are gonna go, unless something evolves that you're excited about.
We have chickens out there too.
Right.
We have the recycling, the compost bin going too, so we hit all the science standards for the grade level.
That's perfect. That's great. What other questions?
I've actually been to Mableton Elementary School to
Okay.
observe, and it was very refreshing to see the arts being pulled back in. I felt like for so long because, I mean, I'm just gonna be honest, from coming out, I was a kindergarten teacher for 5 years. It was, and I'm gonna say the word crafting, but there wasn't the cutting and the pasting and the creating and things like that. So it was actually kind of refreshing to see it
Right.
come about again.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think
Yes, you have to be very intentional about it.
there's a school I've been working with where a kindergarten teacher described it as the pendulum of, this is what school used to look like. None of this is new,
Yes.
right? It's a new acronym that happens to be tied to federal funding. So it's like the flashy acronym of the decade. But it's just best teaching practices. That's really what this is. How do you get students to be excited and engaged in their learning? But she described it as the pendulum, that this is what it used to be, but then the big bad testing, as what she referred to, it came, and it changed our culture and our schools, and now it's kind of swinging back the other way, and hopefully we can find somewhere to meet that gives students these opportunities and gives students these arts opportunities. A lot of students learn best through doing things that are hands-on and doing things that involve the arts, and that is coming from technology, especially right now. Everything's instant gratification on your mobile devices, your computers. It's actually changing the way our students' brains function and the way they process information. And the arts is a way to meet them where they are and the way that they are learning now. What else? Check my time. Okay, so we're about out of time, and I don't want to keep you guys here too long. Our STEM STEAM Forum is coming up. This will be in October. This is a great opportunity to come and learn a little bit. I haven't updated this. To come and learn more about, has anyone been to it? About STEM and STEAM? Okay. So definitely if you're able to send a group, I highly recommend it, but also visiting some schools, and I can talk to, if anyone has questions, recommendations of schools to visit. I think it really helps to see it in action. This is our website. We have a number of resources on our website. We won't post lesson plans, but we'll post links to things like Discovery Education or things that we hear of that schools tell us, hey, Farm Bureau has been so instrumental. We'll post those types of resources of things to help you get started. It also has a list of all of our certified schools and some resources. The document I gave you is an overview of the certification requirements. If you want the 13-page version, it's online. But that pretty much hits the highlights for you. Follow us on Twitter. We post opportunities and grant opportunities, but really what we use it for is when we see great things that other schools are doing, we'll try to retweet it. So if you're on Twitter, definitely follow us there and share what you're doing. We want to share the work you guys are doing too. If you're not already on our listserv, go ahead and sign up for it. We promise not to bombard you, mostly because I'm always driving. But you just send a blank email to this email address below. Contact me if you have questions. I'm happy to help. This is, like I said, this is our job, is to be in schools and support you and work with you and figure out how to get past the pacing guide, and we will help you through that process. Go back. Okay. For this, we'll send out anytime we have trainings, and then we'll send out also if we hear of community partners that have trainings that would be relevant, things like Ag in the Classroom, or if different museums are doing STEAM trainings, we'll try and send that all on that, but we try to do it in like a newsletter style, so we don't send them out individually. All right, well, thank you guys so much. It's 4 o'clock, and it's time to go. All right.
Thank you.